Do you guys just want to talk about the benefits of going to Scandinavian mythology? What does it afford you guys that you didn't have before?
Snow.
You mean the musical artist from the 90s,
No.
Snow? Yeah, I would say levity. Like that was an interesting aspect of the mythologies as I started researching them. Greek, obviously very tragic, very serious, somber. A little bit of humor, but not much at all. But Scandinavians, their mythology is weird, man. And it has their sort of strange, irreverent sense of humor. I felt like it was a good match for what we needed here, which was, this isn't a comedy game by any stretch, but because of the subject matter, because of the length, I knew I wanted to have something where we were okay to have fun with it, and not just always be... Right? We could be Marvel Universe instead of DC Universe.
Is it stressful, Shannon, to be in those early discussions about where to go next? Is it more stressful or exciting to lock down on this is the mythology?
It's all stressful, especially working with that guy.
Stressful.
But no, I think it was exciting for all of us, and the anticipation. Where is that going to lead? I look back, and as stressful as it is, to be able to make that decision on our own with very little influence from anyone outside of these walls, we're really lucky. And the fun and the excitement that go along with it, we're always having. So as hard as it is, as stressful as it is, as much as we bump into each other or butt heads, I think we look back and it's all worth it. Certainly today, when we look back at a 4-year-long journey of getting where we are.
It seems so much easier back then.
Yes.
It's stressful at the time. You look back and you're like, man, that was the easy part.
If you're a huge God of War fan, back in 2010, there's an interview where at some point it came out that David Jaffe originally envisioned this eventually bleeding over into Norse mythology. Can you talk about your guys' choice versus that rough roadmap that seemed to be circulating out there?
No, there was a lot. I mean, it's interesting because even in the first game, it felt like Dave had a lot of avenues of all the places you could go. It was kind of like somebody who goes in and touches all the food and says, nobody after me can make any decisions or have any of this because it's all mine. But yeah, he had a bunch of thoughts. I mean, we had several discussions where it was the thought of Kratos graduating on and connecting into even sort of Christian religions and connecting it. There's the 3 wise men going towards the Star of Bethlehem in the image at the end of God of War 1. There's one that kind of is referencing towards all of these pieces. So the thoughts were a little bit on what he had done, but most of it really was looking at the mythology, what it had to offer, its sort of geographic location to Greece, and then kind of its overall meaning to the story that I wanted to tell. And then saying all right, what's interesting? And it really did come down to 2 mythologies in the end. And half the team wanted one, half the team wanted the other.
Of course.
And it was very divided, and I finally just kind of had to write up a document that talked about why we're going to go with this one and why the next one is something we might explore a little bit later. So
Sand or snow is the decision.
It really was down to that, and I was like, look, man, Assassin's Creed Osiris, which was the code name at the time there, I was like, man, they're going to come out right when we come out. I don't want to have 2 Armageddon, Deep Impact kind of Egyptian mythology games. Look how prescient I was, right? Except it was Origins instead of Osiris.
Is there a lore Bible? Do you really get up in your head, and does the team get up in their head about how does this larger universe of God of War fit together with different mythologies? Do you guys have those ideas locked down?
Yeah, we actually created a timeline that talks about during the Greek era, the ending of the Greek era, the period of time in between, and all the time leading up, what was going on in sort of the Norse myth, and how it's all connecting and all sort of the pre-things happening. So even things we're not covering in the game are indicated little bits here and there. It is definitely one of the more complicated worlds that I've ever constructed and been part of. The sort of core narrative continues to adhere to the adage I stole from people I worked with in my time in a walkabout, which was this concept of the simple stories with complex characters, right? And the world is a very big character within it, and all of the other characters have their own very complicated backstories and desires. And Kratos' very complicated backstory is interweaving inside of that. But the sort of main thrust, the plot of the game is fairly simple and straightforward. But the game itself doesn't feel that way.
But if developers wanted more of the lore background, there is a Bible somewhere that says all right, around this area is when this mythology bubbled up, and so therefore it exists.
Yeah, we have it fairly closely guarded in the sense that there are a few people that have it, but we don't want to have too many people starting to dig into other areas. But to keep everything consistent, we have that fantastic timeline that helps everybody understand.
Is it important with this entry to hint much more at that larger world, just to excite fans in a Force Awakens style way of like, oh, just think about all the stories they can tell? Is that a main drive, or is this solely focused on, we just want to tell the Norse story?
It's both, actually. I think it is focusing on the Norse story, but it also is showing that high concept that all of the mythologies exist on this planet simultaneously. They're all creation stories that date all the way back to the beginnings of the planet itself, but these are the culture's sort of creation story of that culture. But they are sort of simultaneously coming up in different geographic locations on the Earth, and somebody moving between all of those in a time when it was far more about the gods wandering the Earth, is connecting all of that together.
Here's a dumb question. Do you consider in the God of War mythology, are these mythologies sprouting out because people believe in them, or are they sprouting up independent from humans?
I think it's independent.
Okay.
But I think there is a power of the belief as well that continues on it, right? It's maybe a little bit of that Sam Neill Merlin movie, right? Where everybody decides to forget magic and stop believing in it, and it goes away. There is a sense that in our world, the Norse gods existed far before the Viking times, right? So that basically there's all this talk in the era of the Vikings fighting for Odin and Thor and Freya, but they were abandoned by these gods because they're not around, right? But they were around long before, in a time when it was far more barren in Northern Europe. And basically that's our time, right? Our time in which they are connecting. But, in Egypt, the pharaohs were sort of the living embodiment of the gods during a time when it was very crowded for humans. So there's an interesting sort of connection with each mythology. It's slightly different, right? It's slightly different in which their creation story comes about.
Have you become a mythology expert?
No.
Yes, I quiz her all the time.
I leave the mythology to Cory.
Yeah.
I've become an expert on how to spend Sony's money.
I'm only like this way as well because I was quizzed by Christopher Lee during a voiceover session. And thankfully, I had studied up a little bit.
A few answers?
Yeah, I had a few answers, but man, I think I probably it would have gone really poorly had I not answered his questions correctly, because he, I believe, is a scholar of literature, or was a scholar of literature, and definitely wanted to make sure I knew what I was talking about before he was going to take any direction from me.